Look, I have been working as a trade compliance officer for the Colothian Commerce Guild for 73 cycles now, and I have seen my fair share of pompous self-important gatherings, but nothing, absolutely nothing compared to the annual Galactic Summit held at the Zenthari Imperial Palace on Coronax Prime. The hall itself was obscene. Seriously. Columns made entirely of compressed starlight, floors so polished you could see your reflection judging you for even standing there, and chandeliers that cost more than some planet's entire gross domestic product. The whole place screamed, "We have money and you do not so kindly remember your place." I stood near the refreshment table, which was less a table and more a floating platform of exotic delicacies that I could not pronounce let alone afford. Around me, the galaxy's finest preened and postured. To my left, Ambassador Quilnox of the Vryn Collective was boasting about his species' recent expansion into the outer bands. His scales shimmered with that insufferable iridescence that Vryn got when they were particularly pleased with themselves. To my right, a cluster of Morgathi delegates clacked their mandibles in what I assumed was laughter, though it sounded more like someone breaking expensive dishware. Everyone who was anyone had shown up. The Draxian Consortium sent their High Chancellor. The Pliocene Union sent 3 representatives. Because apparently one ego was not enough, even the reclusive Sithrak Collective sent an observer who spent most of their time hovering in a corner literally because they had no legs. And then there was Princess Valora. Oh boy, where do I even start with her? Princess Valora of the Zenthari Empire swept through the hall like she owned it. Well, technically her father did, but she carried herself like she had personally conquered every star system in attendance. Her skin had that characteristic Zenthari purple-silver shimmer, and her ceremonial robes probably violated several conservation laws with the amount of rare materials woven into them. She moved with an entourage of 6 attendants, who looked absolutely miserable, which honestly fair enough. The Zenthari were the unofficial rulers of this sector, and Valora made sure nobody forgot it. She had this way of looking at people, or rather through people, like they were particularly boring holographic displays she had to tolerate. But you know who she really looked through? Humans. Oh yes. The humans, those strange little bipeds from that water-soaked rock called Earth, out in the unfashionable arm of the Milky Way. They had joined the Galactic Council maybe 30 cycles ago, and most species still treated them like the help. Weak gravity worlders, no natural armor, no venom, no telepathy, nothing impressive. They were basically the galactic equivalent of that neighbor who shows up to a formal dinner in casual clothes, technically invited. But why? I had seen human delegates at these functions before. They usually kept to themselves, spoke when spoken to, and generally tried not to make waves. Smart strategy. Honestly, why paint a target on yourself when the galaxy's elite were already competing for who could be the most condescending? Little did I know, that attitude was about to get spectacularly corrected. The grand entrance doors opened with that unnecessarily dramatic hiss that the Zenthari loved so much, and in walked the human delegation. Well, delegation was a generous term. It was one human, a single representative, because apparently Earth could not afford to send more, or did not care enough. Or maybe they just figured one human was already one too many for this crowd. Her name was Mira Chen, and honestly she did not look like much, at least not by galactic standards. She stood maybe 1.7 meters tall, which was laughably short compared to most species present. No bioluminescence. No impressive horns or crests, just dark hair pulled back in a simple style, a plain diplomatic uniform, and a datapad clutched under one arm. She looked like an intern who had wandered into the wrong conference room. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Conversation did not stop exactly, but it shifted. Voices dropped to that particular frequency reserved for gossip and judgment. I watched Ambassador Quilnox lean toward his aide and whisper something that made them both flash their teeth in what passed for Vryn amusement. Mira walked through the hall with measured steps, nodding politely to anyone who made eye contact. Most did not. She might as well have been invisible furniture for all the attention the assembled dignitaries gave her. Except Princess Valora. Oh. She noticed. I watched as Valora tracked the human's progress across the hall with the expression of someone who had just discovered something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. She turned to her closest attendant and said loudly enough for half the hall to hear, "They actually sent someone. How quaint. I suppose even the charity cases deserve representation." Her entourage laughed. That awful sycophantic laughter that court followers perfect over years of practice. Mira's expression did not change. She found a spot near one of the outer columns, away from the main clusters of delegates. Smart positioning actually. Close enough to be present, far enough to avoid trouble. She pulled up her datapad and began reviewing something, apparently content to wait for the formal proceedings to begin. But Valora was not done. The princess drifted closer to where Mira stood, her entourage following like remora fish. She did not address the human directly. That would be beneath her. Instead, she spoke to her attendants while standing close enough for Mira to hear every word. I heard humans require 16 hours of unconsciousness every cycle just to function. 16 hours. Can you imagine being so inefficient? And they eat by grinding up organic matter with calcium deposits in their mouths. Absolutely primitive. One of her attendants tittered nervously. Another made a show of examining their claws. Mira kept her eyes on her datapad. Her jaw tightened slightly. Just slightly. But she said nothing. And their planet, Valora continued, warming to her subject, is mostly water. 70%. What kind of species covers their homeworld in undrinkable liquid and then complains about resource scarcity? I felt uncomfortable watching this, which was surprising, because I generally did not care about diplomatic squabbles, but there was something about the casual cruelty, the public humiliation, that felt wrong even by Summit standards. Mira finally looked up from her datapad. She met Valora's eyes for exactly 2 seconds, then returned to her work without saying a word. Somehow, that silence felt more powerful than any response could have been. Valora's face flushed a deeper purple. She was not used to being ignored. She opened her mouth to say something else, something probably even more cutting, when the ceremonial gong sounded. The formal summit was about to begin. Everyone started moving toward the assembly chamber, and that is when it happened. The corridor leading to the assembly chamber was wide enough to fit a small transport vehicle, but somehow, with hundreds of delegates funneling through, it became a bottleneck of egos and expensive robes. I was maybe 10 meters behind when it happened, close enough to see everything, too far away to do anything about it. Not that I would have. I value my job, thank you very much. Mira was walking along the right side of the corridor, keeping to herself, still reviewing something on her datapad. Princess Valora was holding court in the center, her entourage spread around her like a living barricade, forcing other delegates to navigate around them. The princess changed direction suddenly. No warning, no acknowledgement that other beings existed in her vicinity. She just turned, and her trajectory put her directly in line with Mira. They collided. Not hard, just a brush of shoulders. Mira stumbled slightly, her datapad slipping from her grip and clattering to the polished floor. "Oh," Mira said immediately, bending down to retrieve it. "Excuse me, I did not see." She did not get to finish. Valora's hand shot out, palm first, and shoved Mira squarely in the shoulder. Hard. The kind of shove you give someone when you want them to know they are beneath your notice. Mira staggered backward, catching herself against the wall. Her datapad skidded across the floor, stopping at the feet of a shocked Morgathi delegate. The corridor went silent. Completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop if pins existed in this technological era, which they did not. But you get the idea. "Watch where you are going, human," Valora said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Or do your kind lack the basic spatial awareness to navigate a simple hallway?" Mira straightened slowly, very slowly. She brushed off her uniform with deliberate care, then walked over to retrieve her datapad from the Morgathi delegate, who handed it to her with visible discomfort. "My apologies, Princess," Mira said, her voice level and professional. "It was an accident." "An accident," Valora repeated, as if the word tasted foul. "An accident is when two equals momentarily occupy the same space. This was you failing to show proper deference to your superior." "Oh no. Oh, this was getting bad." I saw several delegates exchanging nervous glances. Ambassador Quilnox had stopped entirely, his scales losing some of their shimmer. Even the Sithrak observer had rotated to watch. "I have already apologized," Mira said carefully. "If there is a specific protocol I have failed to observe, I would be happy to—" "You," Valora interrupted, stepping closer, "should not even be here. Humans contribute nothing to the Galactic Council except bureaucratic delays and tedious moral arguments. You are a drain on resources, a waste of translation bandwidth, and an embarrassment to civilized species everywhere." The crowd was growing. More delegates had stopped to watch. Some looked entertained. A few looked genuinely uncomfortable. Most just looked curious to see how this would play out. Mira took a slow breath. I could see her choosing her words carefully, weighing every syllable. "With respect, Princess, I am here as an accredited representative of Earth and its colonies. I have every right to attend this summit, and I have done nothing to warrant this level of hostility. Right, Valora laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. You speak of rights as if you have earned them. Your species has been part of the Council for barely 30 cycles. My family has ruled the Zenthari Empire for 6,000. You do not have rights here. You have privileges that can be revoked. She stepped even closer, close enough that Mira had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Now, you are going to apologize properly, on your knees, and then you are going to petition my father for permission to remain at this summit, because I am going to recommend he expel your entire delegation for this insult. The silence was suffocating now. I saw several delegates actively backing away, not wanting to be associated with what was happening. Others leaned in, fascinated by the spectacle. Mira did not move, did not kneel, did not apologize again. She just stood there, meeting Valora's eyes with a calm that I found absolutely terrifying. No, she said simply. Valora's face went from purple-silver to deep violet. What did you just say to me? I said no, princess. I will not kneel. I have already apologized for an accident that was not entirely my fault. I will not debase myself or my species for your entertainment. The entire corridor held its breath. And then, from behind us came a voice that made everyone freeze. What exactly is happening here? We all turned. Emperor Theron had arrived. I have seen Emperor Theron exactly 4 times in my career. Twice at formal ceremonies where he was so far away he might as well have been a hologram. Once in a receiving line where I bowed so low I nearly touched the floor with my forehead, and now here in a corridor that suddenly felt about 6 sizes too small. He did not need to announce himself, did not need trumpets or fanfare, or any of that ceremonial nonsense. His presence was announcement enough. The Emperor of the Zenthari stood about 2.3 meters tall, with broader shoulders than his daughter and a face that looked like it had been carved from ancient stone. His robes were simpler than Valora's, which somehow made them more impressive. He wore his authority the way other people wore skin, naturally, effortlessly. The crowd parted instantly. Delegates pressed themselves against the walls. I found myself bowing so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash. Theron walked forward with measured steps, his eyes scanning the scene. They landed on Mira still standing by the wall, then on Valora, whose expression had transformed from righteous anger to something approaching panic, then on the scattered witnesses, all of us desperately trying to become invisible. I will ask once more, Theron said quietly. Somehow, that quiet voice carried further than any shout could have. What is happening here? Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to be the first to explain. Nobody wanted to be involved at all, except Mira. Your Imperial Majesty, she said, executing a respectful bow. Not too deep, not too shallow, exactly appropriate for her rank addressing his. There was a minor collision in the corridor. Princess Valora and I had a disagreement about responsibility. It is nothing that should concern you. Theron's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at his daughter. Valora. She ran into me, father, Valora said quickly. Too quickly. Her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. She was not paying attention, and when I corrected her behavior she became insolent and refused to apologize properly. I see. Theron turned to face the crowd. His gaze swept across us like a searchlight. And I suppose all of you suddenly went blind and deaf. Uncomfortable shifting, nervous claw clicking, the sound of several delegates discovering urgent business elsewhere. Ambassador Quillnox, Theron said, focusing on the Vryn diplomat. You were here. What did you witness? Quillnox looked like he wanted to molt out of his own scales and escape. That is, Your Imperial Majesty, I only saw the end of the, interaction. The end where my daughter did what? Exactly. You could have powered a small starship with the tension in that corridor. Quillnox's scales flickered between colors. The princess made physical contact with the human representative. Your Majesty. A push. After a collision that appeared, from my limited vantage point, to be, possibly, perhaps, mutual in causation. Theron's expression did not change. Physical contact. A push. After a mutual collision. He turned to another delegate, a Pliocene Union member. Do you concur with this assessment? The Pliocene delegate's 3 eyes blinked in sequence. Yes, Your Imperial Majesty. That is accurate. And was my daughter injured in this collision? No, Your Majesty. Was the human injured? No, Your Majesty. So my daughter initiated physical violence against an accredited diplomatic representative over a minor accident in a crowded corridor. It was not a question. It was a statement. A damning, inescapable statement. Velora's face had gone pale. Father, she was disrespectful. She did not show Silence. One word. Just one. But Velora's mouth snapped shut like she had been struck. Theron walked slowly toward Mira. Every step was deliberate. Every movement calculated. The entire corridor held its breath. He stopped directly in front of her. Mira tilted her head back to meet his eyes, and I had to give her credit. She did not flinch, did not look away, just waited. Theron did something then that I will remember until my dying day. He bowed. Not a full formal bow. Not the kind you give to equals or superiors, but a definite unmistakable acknowledgement of respect. The Emperor of the Zenthari, ruler of 47 star systems, bent at the waist toward a human diplomat. Representative Chen, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the corridor. On behalf of the Zenthari Empire, I apologize for my daughter's behavior. What happened here was unacceptable. You have been treated with disrespect and subjected to physical violence while under the protection of imperial hospitality. This is a grave violation of diplomatic protocol and personal dignity. I heard someone gasp. Might have been me. Mira blinked rapidly. Your Majesty, that is not necessary. It is entirely necessary, Theron interrupted gently. My daughter has shamed herself, her position, and her empire. More importantly, she has violated the Terran Compact of 20TD7, specifically Article 12, which guarantees all human diplomatic personnel protection from harassment, intimidation, and violence while conducting official duties in Zenthari space.
Oh,
no. The Terran Compact. I had heard of it, vaguely, the way you hear about traffic laws you never bother to read until you get fined. Velora looked confused. Most of the delegates looked confused. Even I was confused. Theron was not confused. Perhaps, he said, his voice taking on a harder edge, it is time we all received a reminder about why that compact exists, and why humans, despite what some of you clearly believe, are not to be trifled with. He turned to face the assembled delegates, his daughter included. Let me tell you about the Battle of Kronos Gate. Emperor Theron clasped his hands behind his back and began speaking in the tone of someone delivering a lecture to particularly slow students, which, let us be honest, we were. 32 cycles ago, before most humans joined the Galactic Council, there was a situation in the Kronos sector. A particularly aggressive species called the Vekor decided they wanted to expand their territory. They were strong, heavily armored exoskeletons, natural toxin production ships with weapons that could crack planets. He paused, letting that sink in. The Vekor attacked a human mining colony on Kronos Gate Station. Small outpost. Maybe 200 humans. Civilians mostly. Miners, engineers, their families. The Vekor expected easy conquest. They sent 3 warships. Military doctrine suggested that was overkill. I glanced at Mira. Her expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes, recognition maybe, or memory. The humans sent a single ship in response. Theron continued. One ship, a destroyer-class vessel called the Tenacious. The Vekor found this hilarious. They sent mocking transmissions, asked if Earth was so poor they could only afford one ship to defend their citizens. Ambassador Quilnox shifted uncomfortably. Several other delegates had gone very quiet. The Tenacious arrived in the Kronos system and immediately requested negotiation. The Vekor refused. They demanded complete surrender of the colony and reparations for the inconvenience of having to conquer it. The human captain, a woman named Sandra Okafor, asked them 3 times to withdraw peacefully. Theron's voice dropped lower. They refused all 3 times, so Captain Okafor said something that the Vekor recorded and transmitted across their entire fleet. She said, and I quote, "You were warned. Remember that you were warned." The Emperor began walking slowly along the corridor as he spoke, and we all turned to follow his movement like flowers tracking the sun. What the Vekor did not know, what nobody knew except human military command, was that humans had spent the previous 15 cycles preparing for exactly this scenario. They knew they looked weak. They knew the galaxy saw them as soft, primitive, harmless, and they decided to weaponize that assumption. Oh, this was getting interesting and terrifying. Mostly terrifying. The Tenacious carried experimental weapons, railguns that could fire projectiles at 0.27% light speed, missiles with guidance systems so sophisticated they could track a target through a solar flare, and electronic warfare capabilities that made the Vekor ships blind, deaf, and stupid in under 30 seconds. Theron stopped walking and turned to face us all. The battle lasted 11 minutes. All 3 Vekor warships were disabled. Not destroyed, disabled. Their weapons were gone. Their engines were gone. Their life support was barely functional. But the crews were alive. Captain Okafor left them floating in space and transmitted a message to the Vekor homeworld. She told them they had exactly 48 hours to retrieve their ships and withdraw from the Chronos sector permanently, or else the next human response would not be so gentle. Gentle. She called that gentle. The Vekor withdrew, Theron said simply. They have not bothered human space since. And do you know what the interesting part is? Nobody answered. We were all too busy recalculating every assumption we had ever made about humans. The Tenacious was considered a mid-range vessel in the human defense fleet. Not their best ship. Not their most advanced, just a standard destroyer. They have 17 more just like it, and that is not counting their carrier groups, their stealth craft or whatever classified projects they are currently developing. I felt cold, actually cold, which was difficult for a Calothian. But military strength is only part of the equation, Theron continued. Let us talk about economics. Humans control some of the most strategically valuable resources in 3 sectors: rare earth elements, biological compounds, water, so much water. They have turned resource management into an art form. Their agricultural output feeds 17 non-human colonies. Their medical research has cured 9 previously terminal diseases. Their technological innovations have been integrated into 40% of all modern starship designs. He looked at each of us in turn. And diplomacy. Oh, diplomacy. Humans are patient. Infuriatingly patient. They will negotiate for cycles, absorb insults, accept unfavorable terms, all while building relationships, establishing trust, and positioning themselves exactly where they need to be. Do you know how many trade agreements have humans as a third-party mediator? 63. Do you know how many wars have been prevented by human diplomatic intervention? 12. That we know of. Delora looked like she was trying to disappear into the floor. Good. Here is what you all need to understand. Theron said, his voice taking on steel. Humans choose to be peaceful. They choose diplomacy. They choose patience. But choice implies options. And they have options. So many options. Options that most of you cannot even comprehend because you have never bothered to look past their soft skin and their lack of natural weapons. He turned to Mira. Representative Chen's presence here is not charity. It is not a courtesy. It is a strategic necessity. Earth and its colonies represent the 3rd largest economy in the Council. They provide critical resources, military support, and diplomatic stability. The Terran Compact exists because we need them more than they need us. And anyone who forgets that is a dangerous fool. The silence was absolute. My daughter, Theron said, finally looking at Valora, is a dangerous fool, and she will learn better. Emperor Theron turned to his daughter with the expression of someone who had just discovered mold growing in their personal quarters. Valora, you will issue a formal written apology to Representative Chen, to the Earth Diplomatic Corps, and to the Galactic Council. You will attend mandatory diplomatic protocol training for the next 6 cycles. You will personally review every human trade agreement, defense treaty and cultural exchange program currently in effect. All 743 of them, and you are barred from attending any diplomatic function until I personally certify that you understand why what you did today was monumentally stupid. Valora's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Father, you will also make a private donation to the Human Colony Relief Fund. 500,000 credits should suffice. From your personal accounts, not the Imperial Treasury. 500,000 credits. I nearly choked. That was more than I made in 10 cycles. Do you understand? Yes, Father, Valora whispered. Her earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Theron turned back to Mira, and his expression softened marginally. Representative Chen, I hope this incident will not damage the relationship between our peoples. Mira smiled slightly. It was a diplomatic smile, the kind that gave away nothing. Your Majesty, every relationship faces tests. How we respond to those tests defines us. Your response today has been more than satisfactory. Satisfactory. What a beautifully diplomatic way of saying adequate, but I will definitely be reporting every detail of this. The summit will continue as scheduled, Theron announced to everyone, and I expect all delegates to treat Representative Chen with the respect her position demands. Is that understood? A chorus of "Yes, Your Imperial Majesty" echoed through the corridor. Theron nodded once, then swept away, his guards falling in behind him. Valora and her entourage followed, the princess looking smaller somehow, diminished. The crowd dispersed quickly after that. Nobody wanted to linger. Nobody wanted to discuss what had just happened where anyone official might hear. I found myself walking next to Ambassador Quillnox toward the assembly chamber. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Finally, Quillnox broke the silence. I have been a diplomat for 40 cycles, Rennick. I know. I have negotiated treaties with 17 species. I have studied galactic politics extensively. I have multiple degrees in xenorelations. Okay. And I had absolutely no idea humans were that dangerous. I laughed. A short, sharp bark of sound. Neither did I. Neither did anyone, apparently. Did you see the princess's face when Theron mentioned the Battle of Kronos Gate? Quillnox's scales shimmered with nervous energy. I need to completely revise my briefing documents on human capabilities. Everything. All of it. It is all wrong. Join the club, I muttered. I handle trade compliance. Do you know how many times I have approved unfavorable terms for human merchants because I assumed they were too weak to push back? They were not weak. They were positioning. They were playing a long game while we were playing checkers. We entered the assembly chamber and found our assigned seats. The room was buzzing with whispered conversations. Everyone was talking about what had just happened. Delegates were urgently messaging their homeworlds. Tablets were lighting up with revised diplomatic assessments. Across the chamber I spotted Mira taking her seat in the human section. Alone, still, but somehow the space around her looked different now. Less like isolation and more like power. A Draxian delegate I vaguely recognized leaned over to her and said something, probably an apology, judging by the body language. Mira nodded graciously. Then a Pliocene representative approached. Then a Morgathi. Then others. A steady stream of delegates suddenly finding reasons to speak with the human representative, to introduce themselves, to establish connections. Mira handled each interaction with perfect diplomatic courtesy. Friendly but not familiar, professional but not cold. I watched a Sithrak observer, the same one who had been hovering silently in corners all day, float over to Mira's section. They exchanged what looked like a substantial conversation. The Sithrak even performed their species' gesture of respect, which I had never seen them do for anyone. Quillnox noticed too. She is going to be the most popular delegate at this summit, is she not? She already is, I said. We just did not realize it until today. Do you think she planned this? I thought about that. About Mira's calm demeanor in the face of Valora's abuse. About her measured responses. About that simple, powerful no, when ordered to kneel. I think, I said slowly, that she knew exactly what would happen if things escalated. I think she knew the Emperor would intervene. I think she knew the rules and treaties better than any of us. And I think she let Valora dig her own grave while doing absolutely nothing except standing her ground. Quillnox's scales went pale. That is terrifying. That is strategy. The formal proceedings began, but I barely paid attention. I kept watching Mira, who sat calmly taking notes, occasionally nodding along to speeches, looking for all the world like this was just another day. But it was not just another day. Everything had changed. The entire power dynamic of the summit had shifted, and the humans, those supposedly weak, harmless humans, had just reminded everyone exactly why underestimating them was a catastrophically bad idea. Just before the first recess, Mira stood and walked toward the exit. As she passed Valora's now empty seat, she paused for just a moment. She did not say anything. Did not need to. The pause said everything. Then she continued walking, head high, datapad under her arm, completely unbothered. I realized I was smiling. Emperor Theron clasped his hands behind his back and began speaking in the tone of someone delivering a lecture to particularly slow students, which, let us be honest, we were. 32 cycles ago, before most humans joined the Galactic Council, there was a situation in the Kronos sector. A particularly aggressive species called the Vekor decided they wanted to expand their territory. They were strong, heavily armored exoskeletons, natural toxin production, ships with weapons that could crack planets. He paused, letting that sink in. The Vekor attacked a human mining colony on Kronos Gate Station. Small outpost, maybe 200 humans. Civilians mostly. Miners, engineers, their families. The Vekor expected easy conquest. They sent 3 warships. Military doctrine suggested that was overkill. I glanced at Mira. Her expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes, recognition maybe, or memory. The humans sent a single ship in response. Theron continued. 1 ship, a destroyer-class vessel called the Tenacious. The Vekor found this hilarious. They sent mocking transmissions, asked if Earth was so poor they could only afford one ship to defend their citizens. Ambassador Quilnox shifted uncomfortably. Several other delegates had gone very quiet. The Tenacious arrived in the Chronos system and immediately requested negotiation. The Vekor refused. They demanded complete surrender of the colony and reparations for the inconvenience of having to conquer it. The human captain, a woman named Sandra Okafor, asked them 3 times to withdraw peacefully. Theron's voice dropped lower. They refused all 3 times, so Captain Okafor said something that the Vekor recorded and transmitted across their entire fleet. She said, and I quote, "You were warned. Remember that you were warned." The Emperor began walking slowly along the corridor as he spoke, and we all turned to follow his movement like flowers tracking the sun. What the Vekor did not know, what nobody knew except human military command, was that humans had spent the previous 15 cycles preparing for exactly this scenario. They knew they looked weak. They knew the galaxy saw them as soft, primitive, harmless, and they decided to weaponize that assumption. All this was getting interesting, and terrifying. Mostly terrifying. The Tenacious carried experimental weapons, railguns that could fire projectiles at 0.27% light speed, missiles with guidance systems so sophisticated they could track a target through a solar flare, and electronic warfare capabilities that made the Vekor ships blind, deaf and stupid in under 30 seconds. Theron stopped walking and turned to face us all. The battle lasted 11 minutes. All 3 Vekor warships were disabled. Not destroyed. Disabled. Their weapons were gone. Their engines were gone. Their life support was barely functional. But the crews were alive. Captain Okafor left them floating in space and transmitted a message to the Vekor homeworld. She told them they had exactly 48 hours to retrieve their ships and withdraw from the Chronos sector permanently, or else the next human response would not be so gentle. Gentle. She called that gentle. The Vekor withdrew. Theron said simply, "They have not bothered human space since. And do you know what the interesting part is?" Nobody answered. We were all too busy recalculating every assumption we had ever made about humans. The Tenacious was considered a mid-range vessel in the human defense fleet. Not their best ship. Not their most advanced. Just a standard destroyer. They have 17 more just like it, and that is not counting their carrier groups, their stealth craft or whatever classified projects they are currently developing. I felt cold, actually cold, which was difficult for a Calothian. But military strength is only part of the equation, Theron continued. Let us talk about economics. Humans control some of the most strategically valuable resources in 3 sectors. Rare earth elements, biological compounds, water. So much water. They have turned resource management into an art form. Their agricultural output feeds 17 non-human colonies. Their medical research has cured 9 previously terminal diseases. Their technological innovations have been integrated into 40% of all modern starship designs. He looked at each of us in turn. And diplomacy. Oh, diplomacy. Humans are patient. Infuriatingly patient. They will negotiate for cycles, absorb insults, accept unfavorable terms, all while building relationships, establishing trust and positioning themselves exactly where they need to be. Do you know how many trade agreements have humans as a third-party mediator? 63. Do you know how many wars have been prevented by human diplomatic intervention? 12. That we know of. Valora looked like she was trying to disappear into the floor. Good. Here is what you all need to understand, Theron said, his voice taking on steel. Humans choose to be peaceful. They choose diplomacy. They choose patience. But choice implies options. And they have options. So many options. Options that most of you cannot even comprehend because you have never bothered to look past their soft skin and their lack of natural weapons. He turned to Mira. Representative Chen's presence here is not charity. It is not a courtesy. It is a strategic necessity. Earth and its colonies represent the 3rd largest economy in the Council. They provide critical resources, military support, and diplomatic stability. The Terran Compact exists because we need them more than they need us. And anyone who forgets that is a dangerous fool. The silence was absolute. My daughter, Theron said, finally looking at Valora, is a dangerous fool, and she will learn better. Emperor Theron turned to his daughter with an expression that could freeze supernovas. Valora, you are hereby removed from all diplomatic functions for the remainder of this summit. You will return to your quarters and compose a formal written apology to Representative Chen, which will be submitted to the Council records. You will also complete a comprehensive study of the Terran Compact. the history of human integration into the Council, and the economic implications of Earth's participation in galactic trade. I expect a 50,000-word analysis on my desk within 10 cycles. Valora's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. Father, please, Furthermore, Theron continued, ignoring her completely, you are removed from the Succession Consideration Committee until such time as you demonstrate basic diplomatic competence. Your allowance is suspended. Your personal staff is reduced to 2 attendants, and you will personally deliver your written apology to Representative Chen in front of the full Council Assembly tomorrow morning. Oh, that was brutal. The Succession Consideration Committee was everything to Zenthori royalty. Being removed from it was essentially being declared unfit to rule, and doing it publicly in front of dozens of witnesses made it official and humiliating. Valora looked like she might cry, or vomit, possibly both. Go, Theron said quietly. Now. She went, practically ran actually, her reduced entourage scrambling to keep up. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the casual cruelty, the arrogance, the shove, and my sympathy evaporated like water in vacuum. Theron turned back to Mira and his expression softened. Slightly. Representative Chen. Again, I apologize. Is there anything the Zenthari Empire can do to make amends for this incident? Mira was quiet for a moment and I got the distinct impression she was thinking very carefully about her next words. Your Majesty, your apology is more than sufficient, and I appreciate your explanation to the assembled delegates. However, if I may make one small request. Of course. I would like this incident, including your remarks about the Terran Compact and human capabilities, to be entered into the official summit records. I think it would be valuable for future reference.
Oh, that was clever.
That was very clever. She was making sure this moment became permanent documentation, that every species on the Council would have access to the Emperor's speech about human strength, that nobody could claim it never happened or was exaggerated later. Theron smiled. Actually smiled. It was subtle, but it was definitely there. An excellent idea, Representative. I will see to it personally. And please, when you return to Earth, convey my regards to your Premier and Defense Minister. Let them know the Zenthari Empire values our partnership and looks forward to strengthening our ties. I will, Your Majesty. Thank you. Theron nodded once, then swept past us toward the assembly chamber. The rest of us stood there like idiots, trying to process what had just happened. The crowd began to disperse slowly. Delegates whispered urgently to each other. I heard at least 3 different species recalculating their positions on upcoming trade negotiations. I found myself standing next to Ambassador Quillnox, both of us still processing. Did that really just happen? I asked. Quillnox's scales were flickering pale blue, which meant he was disturbed. The Emperor publicly disciplined his own daughter to defend a human. Yes, that happened. I have been dismissing humans for cycles, I admitted. Thought they were just, there to fill a seat, make the Council look inclusive. We all did, Quillnox said quietly. And we were all wrong. Dangerously wrong. I watched Mira, across the corridor. She was calmly reviewing her datapad again, as if the last 20 minutes had been completely routine. Several delegates were approaching her now, suddenly interested in conversation, suddenly respectful. She greeted each one with professional courtesy, neither gloating nor retreating. She is good, I said. Did you see how she handled that? Never lost her composure, never got angry, just stood her ground and let the Emperor do the rest. That is the thing about humans, Quillnox replied. They do not need to prove they are dangerous. They just wait for you to make the mistake of testing them, and then they let the consequences teach the lesson. Mira finished her conversations and began walking toward the assembly chamber. As she passed us, she paused. Gentlemen, she said, nodding politely. Representative Chen. We both replied, bowing much deeper than we had earlier. She smiled, just a little, just enough. Then she continued walking, her head high, her datapad tucked under her arm. Every bit the respected diplomat she had always been entitled to be treated as. The rest of us followed at a respectful distance, suddenly very aware that the galaxy had just shifted slightly on its axis.